Greetings and welcome to the first webinar training hosted by the Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida. My name is Summer Katz, and I am a licensed mental health counselor and the Education and CE Chair with MHCCF. On behalf of the Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida, we are truly relieved and excited to have this opportunity to offer our April 2020 presentation while we all stay in the comfort and safety of our own homes and offices. This is such a unique time, not only in our community and our country, but certainly the entire world. The COVID-19 health crisis has certainly kept us all on our toes. And while we would like to encourage you to follow updates anywhere you can, reputable sources, of course, please consider viewing the latest legislation of our field, including but not limited to laws, rules, and effective orders by going to MHCCF.com. The Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida organization is currently an approved provider with CE Broker for the Florida Board of Mental Health Counseling, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Clinical Social Work. So, only clinicians pursuing continuing education units through the Florida 491 board will be processed. Please keep in mind that in order to qualify for CEUs for your viewing of this presentation, you will be required to complete a post-presentation survey, which will only be sent to you via email if you have pre-registered for the event. Details about this process, again, are available at mhccf.com. The emailed survey will be accessible until April 30th, 2020, and an on-demand option will be available for members starting May 1st, 2020, and it will remain active until the end of the year. MHCCF will be implementing this extended on-demand option as a perk for our members, in addition to their free attendance to this webinar. Upon receiving your completed survey, we will be submitting this 1-hour CEU credit through CE Broker, and we will also be sending a certificate of completion to your email for your records. Following today's presentation, I will be sharing details about Jenna Burton's previously canceled March presentation on cultural competency starts at intake, and we hope you'll join us for this bonus webinar. Okay, today's speaker, Taylor South. Taylor South is a registered marriage and family therapist intern, and he will soon be completing his requirements for licensure. Very exciting. Congratulations, Taylor. He has devoted much of his time to connecting and offering mental health services to children, adolescents, and adults in a variety of settings. Mr. South has worked as an independent contractor as well as served in 2 full-time therapist positions working with at-risk youth placed in a residential living home, as well as currently serving as a full-time therapist with Tri-County Human Services as an addictions counselor. Taylor is specifically overseeing the adolescent population in the Tri-County area, and he has a passion to see mental and emotional health brought to a struggling generation. He currently oversees the application of a weekly adolescent male substance use group that has seen great results in limiting and reducing the use of substance in the at-risk youth he is able to connect with. Lastly, Mr. South offers life coaching services through his private practice, True North Counseling and Coaching, to multiple youth on a weekly basis who are struggling with understanding how their emotions impact their daily life. Taylor's presentation is titled, Men of Steel, When Masculinity Becomes Your Kryptonite. So, thank you, Taylor, for your willingness to transition to this webcast recording with us. Take it away.
Stand up for yourself. Be strong, and don't you dare cry. You tell me this, and then I locked it inside. I must hide. My thoughts and feelings, they felt so wrong because all along you sang the same song. Stand up for yourself. Be strong, and don't you dare cry. But why? Because in the name of strength, I started to hide. And in the name of masculinity, don't you worry, because I became a man. Thank you guys for giving me this opportunity today to kind of share on this topic that is really, really important to me. I really started thinking about what masculinity meant throughout my lifetime, and I realized that I played a lot of sports and I did a lot of things that I was told by multiple people what my manhood and masculinity meant in our world and what it meant for me. And I hear a lot of things related to sports in many different areas of my life where people told me things like, don't cry, stand up for yourself, be a man. And these phrases really shaped who I became and who I was until I learned what it really meant to be a man, maybe, and what masculinity looks like or could look like. I like to use a quote oftentimes by Yogi Berra that says baseball is 90% mental and about 10% physical. I'm a huge baseball fan. It's something I am very passionate about. And I would say that's 100% true, that my mental state on a per game basis, on a per at bat basis, changed my life and changed my results. And so I would say it's the same thing in our daily life. And not everything is physical. A lot of it is 90% mental, or even more maybe, of how we view things and how we perceive things. And I would bet a lot of you get that and understand that. And so I really want to talk today about maybe the ideas around masculinity and what it looks like in our culture. I think it's constantly changing. I think it's constantly changing for each one of us individually. But I think it is heavily determined by our culture and what our culture teaches us and tells us. So things like who pays for the first date or who pays for the food on a date, right, is a really impactful choice that I'm just going to be frank, a lot of guys can struggle with at times. And so things like who initiates the relationship first are all small beliefs that reinforce this sometimes very negative masculine view of men in our culture. So we're going to spend today's session talking about a lot about gender identity and development, how media influences that development, and then also the specific consequences maybe of developing an unhealthy masculinity and parts of our current culture that are pretty unhealthy. We're going to kind of look at a couple different things. Like I said, we're going to talk about overall gender development theory, what the main theories look like and what they say. We're going to look at one more in depth, but we'll look at two main ones that really kind of talk about gender development in psychology. We're going to define masculinity. I've learned that a lot of people are like, what does that even mean? It's a word we can use, but don't really maybe understand it. We're going to talk about media, sexuality, and violence. How the media impacts our perception of masculinity. What does masculinity have to do with sexuality? And what does violence look like in relationship to masculinity? Are all things that we're going to look at today and talk a little bit about. Emotional openness is another really at my heart kind of thing. As Summer read, emotional regulation and how specifically adolescents and young men handle their emotions. I've seen them to really struggle. And not really know where to go and not have much direction with that. So we're going to talk pretty good in depth about that because that's an area that's really close to my heart. And then I end with what now? I end with, what can we do with this? Specifically, a lot of the people I know that are watching are going to be watching are mental health or professionals. And so what can we do? I do have some specific activities. That's one thing that when I've done a lot of presentations, people are like, man, I wish I had more stuff that I could take and use. And so I will give you a link at the end for some resources that you can take. I want to say there's close to like 15 different activities that I use probably on pretty close to a daily basis, I'll be honest. Different activities to help men or young adolescents deal with what does it mean to be a man, just overall answering that question. And then there's also some things for personal life. I think we can't ignore that as mental health professionals or professionals in general, we also have a personal life. And I'm sure many of us have kids and deal with this on a daily basis. And so a lot of it also is going to be a little bit personal for that, of saying, what can we do as people, as persons who live our daily lives as well? And so that's a really important area that I want to offer some advice or maybe input to of what we could do and where to kind of go from there. Like I said, we're going to talk about a couple gender development theories. The two overarching gender development theories are going to be psychodynamic, which is kind of led off by Sigmund Freud. We are not going to spend a lot of time there. I think probably in our education, a lot of us have spent at length talking about that. We know he is one of the first to start talking about psychology and things like that. We're not going to spend a ton of time there, but I do want to point out, obviously, as we all know about Sigmund Freud, is he points out a lot about our perception and our interactions with our parents and how that is a foundational part of our gender development and our development as a whole. And that we cannot forget that. I think if there are some really important things we can take from Sigmund Freud, that is one of them. That our interaction with our caregivers is crucially important to who we can and who we become. Not to say that it is set in stone, but that it does have a very large impact on who we are and who we become. And I don't think we can ignore that. We are going to spend the next couple of slides, especially some good bit of time talking about social cognitive development. We're probably all a lot more aware of this theory with Albert Bandura and Carl Jung. I do want to spend a good bit of time there. I think this is where most of us fall into and where most of us are very well aware of, and where we're going to spend most of our time talking about today. The reason being is social cognitive theory has a couple really important aspects. If you haven't heard of the Bobo doll experiment before, I would be rather surprised. But the Bobo doll experiment, in a very simple understanding, is they took some young children and they had them observe an adult interact with what's called a Bobo doll. Essentially, it's just a punching bag with a face on it. And the way this adult interacted with the Bobo doll was observed by the child. And then the child was allowed free roam in the room. And when they came to interact with the Bobo doll, they oftentimes interacted with it in almost the exact same way that those adults did. So what does that say to us? It's pretty clear that it says how we behave is how they are going to behave. How they see us behave, right, wrong, or indifferent, they are going to behave, and they are going to mimic those things. I know I see this with my son on a daily basis. My son has just turned 1. And on a daily basis, if I start clapping, I'll bet you $50 he's clapping right there with me. Whether there's something to clap about or not, he will definitely be doing that. And so I think it's really important that we're aware of what we are doing. That maybe is somewhere we could go personally, right, for our own lives. But I think it also could go in the therapy room. The therapeutic relationship we build with our clients, I fully understand there are ethical boundaries that we don't want to cross at any point in time. But I also think there's a value in openness. When I meet with an adolescent, there is a significant value in me allowing them to see who I am and being open to an appropriate level with that individual. And I think that plays a part in the therapy room as well. I think we could all say the therapeutic relationship is the most important part. And building that relationship is heavily dependent on who they see us to be and the behaviors they see us model for them. A big part of Carl Jung that we want to be aware of here is the animus and the anima. What that is the animus would be a woman's view of men, and the anima would be a male's view of women. And so I think it's really important that we're aware of these theories and this idea that women have a view of men and men have a view of women, and we can't really ignore that. These views are not always right in the front, right? We're not saying I see women as this or I see men as this, but they're more unconscious. They are more seeing things as we've learned, maybe by more modeling, maybe not even being expressively told this is what a man should be or this is what a woman should be. But we see these things and we develop our animus and anima, and we live our lives with this view of the other. And this view of the other is really, really impactful and can really determine a lot of our behavior and can really impact how we interact with the opposite sex. And so a lot of the time when I'm presenting this, it's really important to me that I understand I'm talking to men and I'm talking to women. So I understand that women have a view of men, and I understand that men have a view of men, and I understand that men have a view of women. And so we can never get away from those things. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that almost right off the bat. Right now, sexual identity and sex in general is one of the most talked about things and debated topics, but I think it's really important that we hit it head on rather than beat around the bush with it sometimes. I really want to be pretty forward about it and just say, these are the things that we're dealing with. And these are the things that the masculine culture, regardless of your identity, the masculine culture is seen in these ways. And that's why I don't say throughout this, this is for men or males. It's the masculine culture. If you are viewed as a masculine figure, male or female, you're associated with these tendencies, and these tendencies can be very detrimental a lot of the time. And so I think it's really important that we see these things for what they are, regardless of maybe biological gender. I think it's really important that we acknowledge it regardless of that. So what is masculinity? When I started, I said, we're going to talk about it. We're going to define it. So masculinity, per everybody's favorite Merriam-Webster, would be having the qualities appropriate or usually associated to a man. So ironically, I just said regardless of male or female, but Merriam-Webster would define masculinity as those qualities usually associated to a man. And I think it's really important that it says qualities appropriate or usually associated. I could probably present for an hour on that alone, but we won't. I really just want to point out that these qualities are typically or usually associated to a man. That's what the definition of masculinity would be. And I think that may be part of the issue with masculinity, maybe is the definition of the word itself. But I think it's important we point out that masculinity is both subjective, but also very, very rigid. I think we could all probably identify people in our lives who, right, wrong, or indifferent, have a very strict view of male and female, a very strict view of what a man is and what a woman is, or what their behaviors, their culture, all of those types of things. And that is subjective to them, right? And that is their experience and their belief, but it is also yet very rigid. It is what they believe, and at times it can be very difficult to change those types of things, which is why this culture of masculinity has translated and gone on for so long. So I'm very well aware that by doing this, I'm probably attacking a pretty large population and a pretty large, long-standing, hundreds of years situation. But I guess I'm not afraid to do that because I've seen how it impacted my life and many other masculine figures' lives. And so I want to address that pretty head on. Typically, if I was presenting this in person, I would say speak to your neighbor. But unless you're sitting in a room with multiple people observing this, you're probably the only one in the room doing it. But just take a moment and you can just think about it. What is it to you? A lot of times the questions I will tell someone to ask their neighbor is, if I were to ask you the question of what is a man, or what should a man do? How should a man behave? When I started the presentation, I said, should a man pay for the first date? Who should initiate a romantic relationship? Should the man initiate that relationship, assuming it's between a male and female? But should the masculine figure even initiate that relationship? I think it's really important that we ask these questions because more often than not in our culture, I know for myself, I was told you will pay for the first date and you should be the one initiating that relationship. And I don't think that's necessarily always accurate. I think that can be really detrimental. That puts a lot of stress on that masculine figure in the relationship. And I think, again, I could probably present for an hour just on that. But I really just want you to take a moment, and before I move on, take a moment for yourself and just think about that. I'm sure when you saw the title masculinity, Men of Steel, when masculinity becomes our kryptonite, you were like, what does that even mean? Masculinity, what, and we almost immediately have these thoughts about that term masculinity. And I think it's really important that we do a little bit of introspection and a little bit of self-thought and self-reflection to say, okay, where do I stand on this? What are my thoughts about this? I had someone when I was presenting one time, you guys you can see the screen and you can see I have a very athletically built, muscular individual on almost every slide. And I had someone come in one time, and I want to say right about here, they said, I just don't get why the man on the screen has to look like that. And I said, okay, help me understand what you mean. And she said, why can't he have more fat on his body? Why did you have to put someone who has pretty legitimate abs and very muscular arms and is holding a weight? And I said, because that's probably our culture's view of a masculine man. And I said, I wanted to fit the stereotype for the purposes of your question. I wanted it to be a little bit of a, whoa, wow, that person is very large and has very large muscles. And I wanted it to be kind of off-settling because I think a lot of times as a man, this is the view that I was portrayed I had to become. This was the view, specifically playing sports. Maybe I interacted with it more because I was heavily involved in sports. But this is what, if I could be like that, I was it. I was the thing. I was the best version of a man I could be. And so I think it's really important that we put that out there and that we're pretty forward about, this is what a lot of young adolescents specifically are shown as the picturesque masculine man. And so I wanted them to see that picture, but because a lot of guys would tell you, what is masculinity? Weightlifting, being able to lift a lot of weight, being strong, a lot of being a leader is probably one that you could put there, which assumes you couldn't be a leader if you weren't masculine or male, which I have a significant issue with. But I just think, these terms and these stereotypes, right, that we associate with masculinity and male figures is difficult. And so that's what I take this activity to do. I want to give you guys just a moment. I know when someone is speaking, sometimes it's hard to be introspective and reflective. And so I do want to take just a short moment and let you think about that. Maybe write them down if you have a pen and paper with you. If you don't, find one real fast and write them down. But just take a moment to think for yourself of what does that even mean to you? What does that look like? What are some of those phrases you would use? So just take just a moment and maybe think about that, and we will move on in just a moment. Okay, so hopefully you took just those couple of seconds, just a very short time to maybe write down some of those terms and things you associate with masculinity and what it is to you. I'm going to play a video here that you should be able to hear and be able to listen to. It's kind of funny, so don't be afraid to laugh. This is not super serious. I put this in there for that reason because it's kind of really ironic, and you'll see more maybe as it goes on. But take a minute and just watch this video for me.
Can a truck change how people feel about a guy?
Which man is sexier?
Truck. That one is way more sex appeal.
That's a man wearing the pants, so that shows that men are in charge. Manly means to not cry, not be a sissy. Men work hard and they do all the sports and stuff. Man up means toughen up and unemotional, go through it.
So that last phrase, I specifically stop it right there. That's where I cut the video because he literally says, man up, no emotion. And I was like, my heart hurts for that because that's what that boy views masculinity and being a man as. And I couldn't imagine doing that. But you hear just a few, right? It's kind of ironic hearing these children share what their view of men is. And so we're going to talk about the same things they started to talk about in that video just for a short time. And what are those influences that we experience that create masculine culture? So what are some of those things? Movies and sports in media. Movies and sports exacerbate the masculine ideology around risky behaviors, around substance abuse, and physical injury. This is one, maybe physical injury is probably one of the main ones for me, is if you get hurt, quote unquote, dust it off and get back out there, right? There's a very, very well-known movie. There's no crying in baseball is a very common phrase from this movie that most people know. And so things like that in media and sports, that's about as direct, right, of don't be emotional as you could get. No crying in baseball. That's pretty clear of what that's saying. And to be one of the most common, right, movies around baseball that we're watching, and that has come out, it's very old now, but it's a big deal to understand how movies and sports are exacerbating risky behavior, substance use, and physical injury as these things almost to pursue, right? We're going to pursue risky behavior. We're going to pursue substance abuse and physical injury, which none of us will be like, oh yeah, we're totally going to go do that. But our movies and sports are actually pushing for that. Whether it's directly or not, they are. And I think we need to be aware of that. Another form of media that heavily influences the masculine culture would be pornography. I think it's really important that we talk about pornography and its impact on the masculine culture and how it portrays men at times and how it directs the behavior of young men. We could go for a whole nother webinar on pornography's impact and the amount of pornography that is used at this time, but the impact of pornography on young men, right? We talked about social cognitive development. They're seeing it, they're observing it, just like those young boys or girls with the Bobo doll experiment observed an adult interact with that Bobo doll. Didn't have to be their parent, it could be any adult. And they saw them interact with that Bobo doll in a certain way, and then they went and did the same thing. So now we're watching pornographic material that is portraying men to, let's just say, sexually abuse a woman. And then we're not expecting them to replay that. I think that's a significant issue, and one that we really cannot ignore. Marketing strategies. I'll go to another slide here in just a moment, but you saw in the video, they said which man has more sex appeal, and then they showed you the picture. They only showed you one picture, but in the actual exercise, there's multiple pictures of multiple men in front of multiple vehicles. And the thing is that the image most people would choose as the man with the most sex appeal is standing in front of that red truck. So a truck is more heavily associated with a sexier man, right? A truck could also be associated with hard work, taking, loading it up, hauling a big trailer, right? Things like that are all masculine qualities that we might attribute and we're expecting out of male masculine figures. I want to go to this next slide. This is a Men's Health magazine, right? If I were to guess of the magazines men use, I have no documentation for this, but I would assume Men's Health is one of the ones that men would read. And if you just look around the outside, you will see quite interesting titles for the articles in this edition. 24-hour testosterone boosters. Break the sex rules. I didn't know there were any. I must need to get this magazine because I didn't know there were those. But a lean muscle diet. Again, going back to building muscle and power foods that will sculpt your body. Ultimate speed and shred plan, the flat belly muscle, excuse me. And then this last one, which I have yet to figure out as many times I've presented this, be the man your dog thinks you are. I don't get that one. I have no clue. I do not have this edition of Men's Health. I have tried to find it. That is 100% honest. I've tried to find this magazine to read that article because that's the only one on there that I have. I don't know where that's going. Be the man your dog thinks you are. I don't know. Couldn't tell you. But I do think the marketing strategies used just on the one title of one magazine, right, is very telling of how our culture views men and what they expect out of men. And men are pursuing breaking the sex rules. Well, if there's rules, come on, guys, let's not just outright break them. But I guess that's what this magazine is telling us to do. You see where a lot of the struggle comes into this conversation of, okay, what do I do with this? If this is what marketing is telling me to do, where do I go from here? Well, I guess I should try to find out how to break the sex rules. I guess that's what this Men's Health magazine is telling me to do. I guess that's what I'll do, right? And especially you could just picture young adolescents or not even adolescents yet seeing this in their local grocery store and saying, I guess I should find out what that is. I guess I should start breaking those sex rules because that's what Men's Health is telling me I should do, right? Not that that's the most reputable, but you have to understand that this is the marketing that's being put out and it's something we have to very well be aware of. Again, continuing on with the media, music, when I, as part of this presentation, as part of developing this material, I did a lot of research regarding music. And regarding, one, what music men are more likely to listen to, and also, two, what themes are most heavily seen in the music that men are more likely to listen to. So I spent a very good bit of time actually looking into this because I found it very, very interesting. But the most common the themes that I found was brand references to alcohol. In most of the music that men are more likely to listen to, there are significant references to alcohol. Specifically beer, and the impacts and the fun of it and the benefits of it and how you can have fun getting wasted, and just all of those types of things are heavily woven into the music that men are associated with. Profanity as a means of degendering enemies. That sounds super complicated, but essentially what it means is using terms to degender a male. For the sake of being professional, I do not intend on describing or using those terms, but I'm sure if you use a little imagination, you could probably think of some of those derogatory terms that a male might call another male that would signify a degendering, meaning making them less of a man or less masculine. One that is very, not very appropriate, but is the most appropriate that I can think of is, in the video you saw, you run like a girl, right? That's degendering. That's removing that masculine male figure from a boy. That's something I could very well see an 8-year-old saying to another 8-year-old, right? At 8 years old, we are using words to degender our enemies. That is really impactful to me. That says a lot about the masculine culture and about what we're expected to do. And I could tell you from personal experience on the playground, right? That is very common. Up through high school, college, and probably even as adults, I think we could all say we may have seen a video or been in an experience where we saw one very clear adult male use some profanity towards another male to degender them. If we think about those words as a way of showing dominance and masculinity, right? So by degendering, we're going from here and we're saying, you're down here and I'm up here. We're creating different levels by using profanity as a means of degendering, which assumes that by making you less of a man, you're down here, and more of a man, you're up here. It just doesn't fit with me. It just does not sit right, and that is a heavily used musical lyric type of thing, heavily found in music that men listen to. Profanity as a means of degendering was something I found a lot of that was very, very interesting to me. And the other thing that's heavily used in music that men are more likely to listen to, or that is researched to be more listened to, is violence. The use of guns, the use of weapons, the use of abuse is much more common in music that men are associated with. If you think about some of those songs in the hip hop community, which is the genre of music that is most heavily associated with men, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what the research shows, is that hip hop music is the most heavily associated genre of music associated with men. The deep bass tones, male-led, are types of things like that. But violence is enormously common in the hip-hop culture, as well as profanity as a means of degendering, as well as brand references specifically to alcohol. And we said earlier, substance abuse as well. So music is a heavy influencer. I will tell you, when I ask an adolescent, what do they do to calm down? They say, listen to music. I'd say 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10. I can pretty much write it down in my notes before they say it, that they listen to music to calm down. And then I think about this, right? You're angry and upset or anxious or depressed, and you hear brand references to alcohol, profanity as a means of degendering, and violence. I'm just saying, it sounds like you're kicking up a pot of not good. It sounds like you are setting yourself up to not be able to handle your emotions very well. So it doesn't surprise me when an adolescent walks into my office and says, yeah, I hit people. So what? That's what I'm told. That's what I'm shown. That's what I'm told, kind of maybe not said, hey, go hit that person. But that's what I am told innately to do. And by music, marketing, pornography, and movies and sports, that's what I should be doing, right? Media is a enormous motivating factor for the masculine culture that's around right now. When I start to talk about masculinity, one of the things that I said was, what is, I asked you earlier, what is masculinity, right? And we all kind of came up with our own stereotypes and our own things. If we use the BEM sex inventory, that is B as in boy, E-M as in man, sex inventory, the traits, if you take that assessment, the traits that are associated with masculinity is interpersonal competence, instrumentality, and agency. Now, to me, I read those and I said, oh, good, I learned nothing because I have no clue what those mean. So then I had to go back and look interpersonal competence and instrumentality and agency up. And interpersonal competence is pretty much simply, that one's probably the easiest one, our ability to work with others, conflict management, negative assertion, emotional support, which that part I don't really get, but disclosure and initiation. So conflict management, initiation, things like that. One thing I would add to this is that I would add my Taylor South research and say interpersonal competence doesn't always mean reaching a common resolution. Interpersonal competence sometimes, for this sake, could be reaching my goal, right? We think of hard male masculine leaders. They are not going to discord with you about what should we do. They're going to say, as your supervisor or boss in the workplace, go do this. And that would be seen as a strong, quote unquote, male masculine figure, and it's something that we should probably be aware of and something that we should know. And that's one thing I wanted to add for interpersonal competence, is that sometimes I think that can be heavily woven into interpersonal competence. Is a strong conflict engaging, not conflict avoiding, but conflict engaging persona can oftentimes go with that as well. Instrumentality is going to be a focus on tasks. So men are often associated with being very task oriented. When I think about this, I think about working on a car, which, I mean, if we're honest, would be a masculine activity, right? I think that would be associated with men more than women. Not that women can't. Be very careful there. My mom would tell you she could change the oil in a car just as good as me. But instrumentality would be, I need to change the oil. So I'm going to empty the oil, get a new filter. You know, I'm gonna follow these tasks and meet these objectives, and I'm gonna complete my task bar none. Think Mission Impossible, right? Literally, the mission is supposed to be impossible, and the goal is I'm going to complete that task, bar nothing standing in my way. I will complete that task. And so I think it's important that we're aware of that that's a masculine, considered to be, per the BEM sex inventory, a masculine trait. And the other one is going to be agency. So self-protection, self-assertion, self. You are your own agency. You are looking out for yourself. You are standing up for yourself. If you guys remember from the monologue earlier, stand up for yourself. Be a man. You are the man, right? Things like that. These very strong you see where I'm going, things, that's agency. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. I need to deal with me. That is on me. That is my deal. That my responsibility. I have heard it is my responsibility more than anything else. And I would say that it could definitely be understood as a masculine trait. I mentioned earlier that there's changes happening all the time related to our view and interaction with sexual, gender identity, orientation, all of those types of things, and it will never stop changing, I believe. But so how has masculinity changed over the years? I think it's interesting that we point out a few things. Again, all my references will be available through however you're viewing this, for whatever agency is allowing you to view this. But in the last 20 years, we've seen quite a few different changes, okay? And specifically, we have seen a decrease in the scores of femininity, and women are scoring more masculine than they ever have before. Meaning, women are scoring higher on those traits of interpersonal competence, instrumentality, and agency. I have my theories for this. I do not have the research to back it, so I can't really go there, but I think men are pushed higher, right? We could talk for days about how men are paid more in any job force and tons of different things like that. So I mean, I'm not a woman. I don't consider myself a woman, but as a woman, I could understand, wait, I want to get paid more, so I'm going to portray myself or gain those masculine traits. I'm going to look out for myself, agency, right? I'm going to become more task-oriented. I think if we think about the women in leadership, they are very cut dry. You know, they may seem very masculine or have a lot of those masculine traits. So it wouldn't surprise me that femininity is on the decline because we're not valuing it. And that's the big thing for me is I think, we are not valuing femininity. And I want to take this moment to make it clear that in no way am I saying either side is any different or any better. What I'm actually saying is the exact opposite, that there is great value on every end and every area on the spectrum. So we could say masculinity is all the way on this side and femininity is all the way on this side. And every step along that spectrum is just as crucial and just as needed in our culture and environment, because I think it's crucial that we have the whole spectrum, similar to like the environment and the ecosystem, right? A very good friend of mine is a beekeeper, and he would tell you that if even half of the bees died, we would follow shortly after. And in my head, I'm like, bro, it's a bee, dude. Like, chill out. Like, come on, it's a bee. And then he starts to explain how important they are to our ecosystem. And I'm like, well, dang, I don't ever want to kill a bee again. I'm scared I'm going to die if I kill a bee because they're so important to our ecosystem. And in a similar fashion, so is femininity. So is these masculine traditional traits. I think regardless of your gender, these traits are very, very important. We do need strong leaders. I would never debate that. We need strong leaders at times in a boardroom to say, no, this is the way we're going. Someone has to do that. Doesn't have to be a man is what I'm portraying. It can be either or. Why can't we have a man in a room saying, hey, we need to think about this. We need to be more emotionally aware. We'll talk about that in a little while, how men are perceived to not be very emotionally aware. Why can't we have men in a room saying, hey, we need to be aware of how this is affecting people emotionally? I'll tell you that 9 times out of 10, that's going to be me in a room, because I'm like, hey, we need to think of how this is going to affect that person. We can't just do that. We need to be aware of how it's going to impact them. But anyways, that's some of the changes we've seen. Is we have seen a reduction in femininity and an increase in masculinity, especially within the female population. So very interesting to know. One of the areas I mentioned earlier that we would be talking about is sexuality. I want to point out that, sexuality can look like a million different things for a million different people. Some of the stereotypes, though, associated with masculine sexuality is men only want sex, right? I have had females, fathers who I have been in relationships with say, you're just in this for sex. And I'm like, what? Dude, I'm like 16 years old, man. I have no clue. Okay, I guess, but that's a stereotype. Men can't be just friends with a female is a common stereotype that I've heard. And the other one, and you heard this a little bit in the video a little while ago, men wearing the pants or holding the power. A very, I would assume, very old trait. I've known as long as I can remember, who wears the pants, right? The men wear the pants kind of concept. And that's a stereotype of men holding the power. Research supports many of these stereotypes, and I think that's really, really important that we're aware of, that research does support that men hold a lot of power. As far as men only wanting sex, that's more or less of a thought or subjective observation. But research does support a lot of these stereotypes actually related to masculinity, specifically related to sexuality, right? That men are hypersexual and all they want is sex and things along those lines. So research does show that men report extremely high feelings of sexual desire. Not really that surprised. Doesn't surprise me. Cool, we're good to go on that. However, I think it is also very important that we say the following question on this, you can see Murray in 2018, the following question on this research asked, have you ever faked your sexual desire to appear more masculine? And almost every man answered yes. So a vast majority answered they had a high sexual desire, and almost every man, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, I believe in the entire data taken, it was like 1 or 2 had said they had never faked it. All the others research said that they had on multiple occasions faked their sexual desire in order to appear more masculine. So I think that first question then becomes quite a bit swayed, right? Because I know if I took it, well, shoot, do they know? I know I have to be sexual. That's what I've been told my whole life, is that I'm a man. I have to be sexual and hypersexual. And so I think we have to be very, very, very careful, even a very, very well thought out and well well used research, I think can be very swaying when it comes to subjective report related to sexual desire in men. My 2 cents. Romantic relationships, we talked about violence in relationships. I know when I was growing up, date rape was a very, very commonly talked about thing. I can't say that I've heard it a lot lately, but violence within relationship and the traditional rules in relationships, or I put quotes around rules because they're not literally rules, but they're kind of those more stereotypes that people think, right? All through high school, men only want sex, men are only in relationships in high school for sex. All those types of things are just really traditional masculine rules. More, I would change rules for stereotypes. But when I'm being told that's what I should be, and everyone's expecting that from me, who am I to not give them what they're asking for, right? Who am I? And if my friend finds out, again, not saying this is anything personal or happened to me, but if I'm dating someone and she portrays herself that she wants to be engaged with me sexually and I decline that, oh man, my credibility is gone, right? My credibility in my masculine culture is now gone. So even if I didn't want to or didn't have those high feelings of desire that I may have reported, I'm going to fake it because I'm a man. And I think that's where some of this gets very hard to be honest about. And unless you're really comfortable being honest about that. And so I think that's something we have to be very, very on top of and very, very aware of. After sexuality, we can talk about violence, which was kind of the end of that too, the violence in sexuality, the media impact of violence. If you assume a guy's picking out a movie, the assumption is they're picking Mission Impossible or The Avengers or another action movie, right? Because violence is what men want. Violence is what men pursue, right? We talked quite a bit already. I kind of did my soapbox spiel about violence in pornography and the impacts it has on adolescents. I can tell you, I have sat in more sessions than I'd like to admit where the adolescent said to me, of course I've hit my girlfriend while we're having sex. That's what I'm supposed to do. That's what sex is. If we're pretty honest, and I'm going to be relatively frank, spanking, seen as a very sexual behavior that the men would typically participate in, is something we need to be very aware of, that's encouraging sexual violence. And I think plays into the masculine culture and was very shocking to me as I started to look into it more. I was like, wow, that makes total sense. It makes total sense to me that adolescents are viewing astronomical levels of pornography, which have very high propensity for violence, and then engaging in that same sexual violence. What would we expect? It's the Bobo doll experience all over again. It's just on laptops and iPhones with pornography. And so I think it's something we should be very, very aware of. We talk about violence and with risky behavior. Most mental health professionals know the statistic that men are more likely to follow through and actually kill themselves from a suicide attempt. They're more likely to use lethal means such as a gun and shoot themselves in the head. Men are far more likely to choose far more lethal means when acting in suicide. I don't really know where that comes. I couldn't tell you, except for the fact of a gun is seen in itself as very masculine. And so that's something that's an area of this presentation that I don't have an answer for, but needs to be brought up and discussed. The power struggle in all of culture. Strength and weightlifting is very large within the male culture and the male community, but I think it's important that we show hegemonic masculinity. What that is the societal view that men are higher. That's what hegemonic masculinity would be. The societal view that men are above, women are here, and masculinity would be here. And we talked about this a little while earlier, that I would say it's true. I would say without a doubt, men are typically paid more. At this time, the research would support that men in the same position as a woman would receive higher pay. And that's an issue. But it creates this idea that men are more valuable and also at the same time puts more pressure to do that and to be that. If I was, and I do consider myself a fairly emotional male masculine figure, I would be very concerned about portraying myself as less masculine, because when I'm more masculine, I'm seen as above. So why would I take a step down? Why would I take a step back from a position I've been given? It doesn't make sense. It's not natural for us to do that So I am not going to portray myself any less masculine than I can convince everybody else that I am. I am going to portray myself as masculine as I can, because then I reap the benefits of hegemonic masculinity. So we could expect men to start changing this, but then at the same time, those men who would be more emotional might lose the benefits of being a man. And that's a very difficult place to be. And it's kind of a between a rock and a hard place. So again, I said strength and weightlifting already, and just muscle mass and all of that. Aggression is commonly seen as a masculine trait. Feelings of aggression are seen to be heavily mediated by empathy. And we will talk in a little while about how empathy is seen as a non-masculine trait. It is seen as a feminine trait. So being able to sit with someone and say, wow, I can feel that, is not masculine. You see, we're now saying, no, you're just crazy, or you're just struggling. You see how that can now become what men say. Because if I say, wow, that sounds hard, I just lost my level of masculinity, quote unquote, to use a very adolescent term. I just lost my man card, right? Because I said, wow, that must be hard. No, you don't say that. You say something more on, man, you'll be all right. Dust yourself off. Let's go. Right? We said, again, going back to that video, I love that video. Going back to that video, that boy says, no emotion, push forward, tough it out. All of those types of things are not empathy. That is like the polar opposite of empathy. And so we can see where aggression comes from in all of that. Again, we talked, the last one was empathy. Emotional openness, I think, would go right along with that. Emotional expression is a significant or major characteristic in relationship development. I say, and I'm sure all of you do to your clients as well, you cannot have a healthy relationship without open emotional expression. It's not going to happen. You can have a relationship. It is not going to be healthy and productive and fruitful. It ain't going to happen. You have to be open and emotionally expressive. And so that's where emotional openness and expression becomes really, really important. So research on emotional expression would show that men are far less likely, like not even close, to express the emotions of affection, happiness, and sadness, right? So we think affection, happiness, and sadness. Even honestly, I'll be totally honest, hearing affection just sounds very feminine. Happiness sounds pretty feminine to me. I just don't think I would really use that word. I feel happy today. I just wouldn't do that. I just wouldn't say that. Sadness, can kind of go either way. I think that's far more of an overall emotional openness issue. The one thing I would point out, and it's kind of on the screen already, but you want to know the emotion men are great at displaying is anger. We are A+ at showing people that we are angry. And I can tell you adolescents for days where I'm like, you're not even angry at all, are you? Yeah, I'm really mad. No, you're not. You're just really sad. And I'm sure all of you have seen and at some point probably used the anger iceberg model and all of the benefits that come from that. If you haven't, you should, because it's really, really, really helpful. But because, man, it is so easy to yell, hit, scream, and display anger. Like, if we're honest, it's just so easy. It is right there at the tip of our tongue. As a man, all I got to do is clench my fist, right? All I have to do is clench my fist and grit my teeth, and immediately anger is displayed. Regardless of whatever is going on the inside of me, it is so easy for me to display anger and still look tough. That is not seen, right? Probably one of the only emotions that would not be seen as feminine would probably be anger. We transition on to toughness, and men feel a lack of competence regarding the ability to support others. Emotional openness. I wonder why we can't support people when empathy is seen as feminine. I wonder why I can't be there for my friend who's struggling with the death of his father when it's seen as feminine for me to say, man, that's hard, and let him cry on my shoulder. It doesn't surprise me that men would report that they lack competence in the ability to support others. It does not surprise me one bit that men report they struggle with that. So we've covered a lot of material as far as what masculinity looks like and how it's detrimental at this moment in our culture to specifically adolescent males who are really, really developing a lot of this. So I think it's important we address that. But again, like I said in the beginning, I want to make sure anybody who hears, listens, sees, or any way interacts with this presentation walks away saying, I don't just see an issue, but I know what I can do about it. And so what now? What do we do now? Where do we go from here? How can we change this? One at a time, one person at a time. And I can tell you, I've taken a personal commitment to try to change this as much as I can, starting with myself and in the future, moving on to my son. But I believe the next thing, I have another video. It's the second half of the video we watched earlier. So take a look and enjoy this. It again, is very ironic and pretty entertaining. So.
I like drawing and I like birds and flowers.
It's sort of like very stereotypical to assume that only girls can wear pink and play with princess dolls. You should be able to do your own things and do what you want.
Some people don't like what the stereotype is.
My brother, he's the same size in clothes as my mom. Sometimes he wears her shoes or her jacket or something.
My uncle is a chef and my dad cooks all of our food.
Crafting. I love crafting. Origami sometimes. And I also like to do all those things because that's me. That's who I am.
I joined hip hop when it was just one other boy. It was just us and 4 other girls.
I play with girl toys and boy toys. I don't really care which one is meant for boys or for girls. I just play with them. They're toys.
If I were to describe the perfect man, the words would be smart, not judgy, and kind, and he likes caring for animals.
If you try to go against stereotypes, then you can. When you go your own way, it feels good because you feel free and you can do what you want to do and you don't have to do what other people say.
So you see, that's part of the activity thing that I will give you. It's actually that link that's right there on the screen. So what now? What do we do? The three things that I would significantly recommend is educating children. It says educating your children, but educating children in general. I would presume those kids on the screen were no more than 10 years old. And you can see, right, they were just like, I don't get it. It's literally the one kid, it's a toy, right? Why wouldn't I be able to play with the princess? It's a toy. Who cares? But that link there, I specifically want to point out that link there has before I talk about those exercises that you could do with clients in session. If you are a mental health professional or if you are just a parent with a child, you could use those exercises. In the video, you saw a couple of the exercises, specifically the one where you use media magazines and you cut the things out and you make a poster and you put words on there of what you think masculinity should be versus what it is. Right. And so you could have 2 sides of the same poster. I've done that with quite a few of my groups that I've run before and gotten awesome results to watch the polar opposites on the sides of the poster, where one side of the poster is just prototypical masculinity and all the things we've talked about already today. And the other side is openness and commitment and those types of skills that allow us to really develop healthy emotional understanding. Emotion coaching is something I use a lot. Maybe it's because it kind of relates to the sports side of me because it says coaching. I don't know. But emotion coaching is pretty simply coaching on how to use our emotions. We talked about the social cognitive theory, model it, help them understand it, and then they can do it. That's the next one, modeling healthy masculinity. Listen, this is the part of it where it may be a little bit personal for me because I do have a son. And so modeling for my son what it looks like to be a healthy male, but still masculine individual. What does that even look like? And today we've talked about a lot of the rough sides of it, but really we have to do what the last one says, which is empower the feminine traits, what would be associated in that BEM sex inventory as femininity would be warmth, expressivity, and communion. none of those are bad. Like, all of those three terms are fantastic. I would hope that I am warm with my spouse and with my friends. I would hope that I am able to build that relationship and be expressive with them. I would hope that I'm able to express myself openly and honestly and without regard for, oh man, I'm going to be seen as less of a man if I do this. I would hope that I would be expressive. I would hope that I could work in community with others. I would hope that it's not just my goals, but the community's goal. That's what communion means. It's working in community with others and being able to say, okay, your goals and my goals meet here, and then that's the goal we're going to work towards. I oftentimes use this for on a team, right? A football team's goal is always to score a touchdown, right? I cannot do that by myself. I don't care how good you are. You are not going to score that touchdown by yourself. You have to have, to use sports terms, your line, your receivers, and everybody else. You have to have that community around you in order to be productive and in order to reach the goals as a community. So those terms, I don't see anything negative out of any of them. I have nothing negative to say about warmth, expressivity, and communion. So why do we struggle with that? Why do we struggle to allow our young men and men in general to be warm, expressive, and live in communion with others? We need to empower those things. We need to show them that it is okay to do that. And sometimes as counselors, that can start in the therapy room. And as personal individuals, that can start right when this ends. I want to make it very clear that this presentation is hopefully benefiting you on every facet of your life, not just as a mental health professional or whatever profession you are working in, but that it would help you personally. It would help you understand maybe a little bit of what the masculine culture is going through, and maybe a little bit of what we could be experiencing and why it might be hard for us to be expressive. It is very countercultural for a man to express what's going on. So as frustrating as that might be, I think it's something we have to be aware of how that's affecting us. I really appreciate your time. I really hope you got at least a little bit of something out of this. If you have any questions, I've listed my contact info here with my email. It's typically going to be the best way to get a hold of me because we all know we're in sessions and we all know we're not answering a phone at a session. So really sending me an email, I would love to connect with anybody. I would love to discuss this further. I really appreciate what I've been able to share. I really appreciate your attentivity, even the fact that we're not live. I would assume you've been attentive and gotten something out of it, and I really appreciate the time that I've had to share those things with you. If you have any questions, you're looking for more info, more outreach, please let me know, and my email is listed there on the screen.
Wonderful presentation, Taylor. Thank you.
I will stop the share, and Summer can take that over for you guys.
Well, again, thank you, Taylor, so much. I mean, I think your presentation was just so eye-opening and honestly pretty insightful for me as a woman. So yeah. I really appreciate your time. And thank you to our viewers for watching the first Mental Health Counselors of Central Florida webinar presentation. We hope you'll join us again for another online training. Please keep in mind that if you are interested in accruing continuing education units for your viewing of this presentation, don't forget to complete the survey, which will be sent to your email as long as you have pre-registered by April 17th, 2020 for this event. You can go to MHCCF.com for details. And as a reminder, members can access this webinar presentation through the end of 2020. Please make sure to keep your eye out for details and availability of another amazing presentation soon. Stay safe, everyone, and continued well wishes to each of you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.